Okay, it looks like we're live now. Well, welcome everybody. This is the first Startup Champions Network webinar. So certainly appreciate you all being here today. And the focus is measuring ecosystem success. We've got two really great panelists to get us into this topic today. So I'm going to just kind of frame things a little bit. I'll introduce both Shane and Robb, and I'll give you a little bit of orientation in how to ask questions, and certainly would love to get more questions today. And then we'll hop right into it. So let's just talk a little bit about why we're doing this. So the whole goal in doing these webinars is to give the startup champions around the country access to some of the best thinking that exists in the community. And we're going to be doing these on a bi-monthly basis. Our next one will be in January, on January 14th, and I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. But again, if there are topics that you'd like to see, or you'd like to participate in any of these, please let us know, or maybe you know of people who would be good for these conversations. And if you don't feel like you've missed anything, because this is our first one, so you may even have good comments for us in terms of how to structure these better, and we'd certainly love to hear that as well. So the whole goal of today is really to talk about what are some of the best thoughts and practices that exist today on measuring ecosystem success. Many of the folks within the Startup Champions Network either run accelerators or incubators, or somehow need to validate what they're doing. And we certainly want to help with that conversation and process. So let me introduce Shane and Robb. So flipping to another page here. So Shane is a partner at Your Ideas Are Terrible. Your Ideas Are Terrible is a consultancy that helps large organizations learn and implement entrepreneurial methods to solve their innovation growth challenges. Shane is also a co-founder of Startup Genome, which is a nonprofit that maps and tracks entrepreneurial ecosystems around the world. Shane was also the first employee of Startup Weekend, and he was instrumental in helping the organization scale to over 1,200 events per year, and which were delivered and have been delivered in over 100 countries. So thank you, Shane, for being with us. We really appreciate it.
Yep.
And he hasn't shaved today, just so you all know. But maybe sometime later he will, who knows. And we're also joined by Robb Kunz, who is the founder and CEO of several high technology companies. He's an active angel investor. In fact, he was Angel Investor of the Year in Utah this year, which is it's the first time that they've given that award out in Utah. So congratulations, Robb. He's also the founder and managing partner of Ventureblue Capital and the co-founder of BoomStartup, which is Utah's mentorship-driven investment program. One of the things that I read about Robb is actually on BoomStartup's just moving into the Impact Hub offices, and they're installing a massive satellite dish. And Robb, apparently you're the first civilian to make two-way radio contact with astronauts on board the International Space Station. Is that true?
Yeah, that's right, and with the qualification of where the video has been filmed at both ends of the conversation.
Gotcha. Well, welcome, and thank you for being with us today. We really appreciate you both taking the time. And so just so everybody knows how we're going to be doing this, you all have submitted some great questions, and so we're going to first really focus on sort of getting through some of those questions, plus some that we've developed on our own. And then we certainly would love more of your questions. And so just so you know how to submit questions, on your screen in the upper right-hand corner there is, and I'm just looking because I have another screen open, there's a box with a bunch of sort of dots on it, and just a small icon that is sort of a square icon with a bunch of dots. Click on that, and that will open up the Q&A dialogue window for you, and you'll be able to submit questions through that, and that will allow us to real-time be able to begin responding to your questions. And just so you know, from a system standpoint, we have about a 1-minute lag between what we're saying and what you're hearing. So understand that there is we don't this isn't sort of immediate in terms of response, but we'll certainly aim to get through as many questions as we can as we go through the discussion today. So with that, let's hop in, and we want to really keep this very much a dialogue and good discussion. So the first question is really very simple. I say simple in that it's only a few words, but it may launch us a little bit into this. So why, and maybe I'll start with Rob, and then we'll go to Shane. Rob, why is measuring ecosystem success important? Why do we want to do it?
Yeah, I think at least from our perspective here, we're based in Salt Lake City, and one of the reasons why we want to kind of measure that here locally, I mean, it starts with us being kind of an accelerator. We're kind of the big 800-pound gorilla here in Salt Lake City, but we want to measure the ecosystem strength continuously here, because one of the challenges we have, like most ecosystems do, is making sure that we have funding available for these companies. And if we can measure the ecosystem and show, particularly to outside venture capitalists that want to come and set up offices here in Utah, having some metrics and some data behind the facts is like really attractive to draw out like new venture capital and financial strength into the ecosystem.
No, that really makes a lot of sense. Shane, you've looked at this issue. Obviously, Rob is looking at it from a sort of Utah and Salt Lake City viewpoint. You've looked at this sort of nationally and globally. So I guess how do you look at it, and is it different than sort of how Rob looks at it?
No, I mean it's exactly the same. We built Startup Genome to support people like Rob, people that I call community builders, and they, depending on their role or their purpose, they have different reasons that they need to measure success. Kind of like Rob, maybe Rob's a little bit more mature, but a lot of new organizations just need to justify their existence. And when you're fundraising as a nonprofit, or you're asking for sponsorship for an event or a program or whatever it is, at some point people ask, what's the impact you're having? What's the ROI on my fundraising sponsorship dollars? And these folks never have an answer to that, rarely have an answer to that. Unless they've been around for a while, they have their own data, they have stories to tell. So we built Startup Genome to help those people have answers to those questions. And then there's like another layer of people out there that call themselves kind of startup community builders. And they've got their fingers on a lot of different things in the community. They're not just focused on one program. And these people put a lot of time into growing their local ecosystem. And they put a lot of heart into it too. They love their cities. I'm thinking, for example, about Greg from Fargo. There's this great, he did a TED Talk about the Fargo startup community, and he's been there for several years, and he's launched Startup Weekend and TED, and he's been instrumental in a number of programs. And this guy gets on stage at this TEDx event, and he cries because he loves his local community so much. So he's putting his heart into it, and he's flying blind. He's been working on it for a few years. He has hunches on what the gaps are in the community, but he doesn't know for sure. So if we can give him more visibility into what the gaps are and what the effectiveness of the programs are in that community, then he can make better decisions about how to spend his time, how to redirect other volunteers, where his fundraising should be spent, so that he can ultimately achieve his goal, which is to grow the Fargo community bigger and faster.
Well, that's, in what you're saying, it's actually a really good segue to sort of talk about what should be measured. So what do you find the drivers are? And maybe if you want to continue with that thought, Shane, what are some of the things that, let's say, motivate a community builder and guide them effectively?
The things that motivate a community builder, well, that's kind of the way you ask that's a little bit different. What motivates them is knowing that they're making a difference, I think. Usually, sometimes if they're in charge of a program, they need to hit metrics, they need to get to their numbers, they need so many companies going through a program, so many people, and so they need to measure things like people touched, graduates, that type of stuff. But generally, they just need to know that it's making a difference, kind of in the longer term. This is a tough question. I thought a lot about this beforehand. At Startup Genome, we took an approach where we just tried to measure everything we possibly could because we didn't know the answer to this question. We didn't know what mattered. And we also found that different things matter to different people, not just based on what they're doing, but also where they are in the world. Employment matters a lot here in the U.S. A lot of places don't care. A lot of places care a lot more about deals and fundraising. Some communities have significantly more companies bootstrapping, and they view that as a vanity metric. So, I could list all the things: number of companies started, the stages those companies are at, industry breakout, where the capital is coming from. It's coming from inside the company versus outside, measuring that and how that changes over time. Measuring the people, where are they coming from? What happens after a company shuts down? What happens to those people? But what I wrote down here, because this is what I really wanted to talk about when you answer this question, I wrote down the weird things that we never thought to measure that people ended up asking for. Number of repeat founders. So, a lot of entrepreneurs try this thing once, fail, and then go back to their corporate jobs feeling defeated. But there's some benefit in re-engaging those people, getting them to try again. I mean, I don't know what the number is, but the average founder isn't successful until like the third or fourth company or something, right? So do those people try again? Founders per startup. This is one thing that people tend to overlook. It's it's not just a number of startups. It's, well, how many of those are solo founders versus teams starting? And that should inform the types of resources that you build to support companies. And that actually varies significantly across geography. So find out what that looks like for your city. Another thing is, and I alluded to this a little bit, but measuring how the community reacts to an event, or not an event like an event you buy a ticket and go to, but like a thing that happens, for example, like a company shutting down. Do those people get reemployed by other startups, or do they leave town or take the corporate job? That is a significant signal of community health, I think. And then there's some other things that are harder to measure that I think are really important. One would be happiness of entrepreneurs. And I don't know how to measure that beyond talking to them and using feelings to gauge that, and maybe doing some surveys over time. Ease of doing business being the same thing. There's some government indicators on how easy it is to do business, like cost of office per square foot, and then I think somebody, I don't know who it was, compared countries on how easy it is to do business, how kind of obstacles do you run into. But I'm thinking more like, how hard does the entrepreneur locally feel like it is to do business? And then by doing those interviews with those people and finding out why they feel it's tough, and then digging deep, you can find out the obstacles they're running into and then bring them solutions. Sorry for the long-winded answer. Rob?
No. That was really good. So, okay. Rob, obviously Shane's taking this, very much from a sort of global perspective. When you're looking at, both sort of Utah and Salt Lake City and impact, what do you find the drivers that inform whether it's the funders that you're talking to or motivate the investors that you have and so on? What are the key drivers that you found?
Yeah, I think we do have probably two or three as I kind of think back. I mean, running an accelerator, obviously we're kind of the heartbeat of the local Salt Lake community, right? And so one of the things we look at as a measurable metric is this whole thing around how many applications are we getting each year over year, and cohort from cohort. Are we seeing more applications from our local ecosystem, fueling the fire? And we want to keep seeing that grow, year after year and cohort after cohort, essentially. And so the number of applications is a pretty important metric for us. But that's just kind of the beginning. And so the next thing that we like to look at is, okay, we can have a lot of people applying, a lot of companies being created, but it comes down to, like I mentioned earlier, is there the financial strength in the ecosystem to keep fueling these companies. And so the next metric we look at is what percent of the companies that are applying to our accelerator, what percent of those actually get funded? You know, once they come in and we shortlist them and all that kind of good stuff. And we like to see that number to be somewhere in the 65 to 75 percentile basis. We like to see that number to be pretty high and pretty strong as a second indicator, because if they're not getting funded, it either means there's not enough capital in the ecosystem, right, for these companies to get funded, or the companies that are pitching to get funded don't have that strength. They don't have enough traction. They don't have a strong founding team. And so you got to kind of figure out why the companies aren't getting funded. But I still think that we really like that kind of what percent actually kind of get funded. And then the third thing is, because most of the funding that these companies get at the earlier stage, you know, especially in an early stage seed round, is going to provide them runway, usually like 12 to 14 months. So they're going to be raising like $500,000 to $1 million. And so we actually like to look back after 3 years, and the metric we like to track is what percent of the companies that did get funding, what percent of them are still in operation, right? So are they sustainable? Are the entrepreneurs and the team kind of still working and kind of going through? Is there enough community support, you know, outside of the National Seed Series funding? Can they get A Series funding? Or maybe they don't need funding. Maybe they have, you know, great revenue traction, and that's kind of like the third metric in terms of you know, the sustainable operations of the companies within the ecosystem that we like to look at.
Now, do you track it all? Do companies stay in the geography? You know, do they stay local? Do they move? Do you track any of that?
We do actually. We look at that piece. The one that's actually kind of more interesting to us, right? Being, again, this is my conversations really around Salt Lake City and Utah and being very local.
Sure.
So one of the metrics we like to track is what percent of the applicants that actually come into our ecosystem from outside the state, what percent of them actually stay and don't go back home? Because to build our, you know, to strengthen our local ecosystem, we actually want to track entrepreneurs and founding teams outside of the ecosystem, but really have them stay. And so that definitely is a kind of a key metric if we can keep them here after they've been here for 3 or 4 months.
Sort of a stickiness quotient of some kind, yeah.
Very good, yeah, very good, yes.
Bill,
So,
I was talking with, let me add to that real quick. I was talking with, I just moved from Omaha to Tucson. I lived in Omaha for 3 years. Got to know that community a bit. And, you know, when I first moved there, all of the entrepreneurs were complaining about access to capital, and then I got to know the investors, and they were all complaining about not having enough fundable deals, not enough fundable companies. When I dug into that a little bit more, they said that they see a lot of deals, and they have a lot of capital to deploy, and so it's not an access to capital issue. It's that the investors locally didn't see most of them as deals they were interested in. They weren't fundable deals. These companies didn't have enough traction. They didn't have enough evidence that they would work. They didn't prove their business model. And so that's something that these investors, or one particular investor, was starting to measure over time. He was literally checking as he saw deals across his table. This is, I think, fundable or not fundable, and seeing how that number changed over the years. And then he, because he cares about the community, he took it upon himself, and he used to spend lots of time educating angel investors and trying to get more investors in town, or high number of individuals to be investors. He stopped doing that, and he started putting his time towards getting entrepreneurs to become fundable, or getting them to basically get early traction and get customers and get to revenue faster so that they're investable.
That totally makes sense. So it may, getting that information, understanding those numbers, may not only affect the sponsors and their commitment, but also may affect the programming. You'll get a lot of good information that will sort of change how you support the ventures as they're maturing or going through a program. Is that part of, Rob, do you see that as some of the data you're getting? Has it evolved your the efficacy of your programming as well?
Yeah, it definitely has. It definitely has. In fact, what Shane was saying, I mean, this fundable thing is a really important discussion to have with your community, because my experience as a pretty active angel investor is that, you know, the best companies will get funded. Like, that's just, I see that all the time. It's not like, I never see like a really good company not get funded. So the question is, well, what is a good company? But, you know, I think that kind of philosophy about the best companies will always get funded. And so therefore, what Shane's saying is really, really good, which is let's figure out, right, how to mature the company's growth in terms of content and programming accelerators, or even like the community meetups that we have, like here in Salt Lake City. We'll pick a topic, things that people are having trouble with, and then get the whole community around those topics. And so not only can we kind of raise the bar in the individual entrepreneur's understanding, but the whole community up as well.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm just going to remind our audience that you're welcome to submit questions, and if you haven't figured it out yet, there's an icon in the upper right-hand corner that's square, but it's sort of a series of dots, and if you click on that, that will open up your question and answer window where you can submit questions through a little dialog box in the bottom. So please submit your questions. We will certainly endeavor to tailor this discussion to your needs for sure. So, so are there, as you've been sort of measuring data, and maybe we'll go back to Shane on this one first, is are there some things that have surprised you in that they actually haven't become that important in the scheme of things in terms of measurement? Are there data points that you kind of thought would be important at the outset and turned out not to be as critical?
There are a lot of stuff that we measured that we realized later didn't help anybody make decisions. Mm. And that's how we decided, and that's how we tried to decide what we should show on our website, what we should measure, what we shouldn't. Did it help startup community builders make decisions? Because some of the numbers are sexy to look at. It's sexy to look at a map of your community and see the number of startups grow every year. But when somebody looks at that, and then they're thinking about funding something or starting a new initiative, it doesn't inform their decision at all. So it's kind of a worthless number. And there's no way to prove causality, or it's really hard. So even if you start a program and then you look at the kind of overall community and you see growth, there's no way to prove that what you did caused that or what's causing that. So some of that higher level stuff that everyone immediately thinks, like, okay, number of startups started, how does that change over the year? Industry breakout, what does that look like? Doesn't really help to anybody, which really surprises me because it seems like the baseline stuff to measure. Another thing that really surprised me that I alluded to a little bit earlier, I don't want to repeat myself too much, but the whole looking at deals, looking at which how many companies are funded, and how that matters in some communities and how it doesn't matter in other communities. Some countries doesn't matter at all, man. And in some cities, even in this country, they're really proud of their ability to bootstrap, and the local influencers there look down upon taking on investment capital unless you absolutely have to. They consider it a burden. They preach that locally. So for those communities, it doesn't matter. If you show them a chart of deals that happen, they would go, so we have way more companies bootstrapping here. We have way more companies hiring people that aren't on this list that are making revenue, and they consider that a vanity metric. They don't care.
Interesting. And Rob, how about yourself? Have you seen some data points or metrics that you thought would be important that you've kind of discarded over time?
I would say actually we probably here locally at least we've seen I think one of the things that surprised us is nobody's really figured this out yet on how to measure stuff, right? That's seems to be a fundamental problem with all the PhD scientists and data stat people we have all over the world in the United States. No one's really figured out how to really measure the ecosystem, and so we've never really gotten too caught up in kind of the metrics. I definitely agree with Shane. I think what Shane just said is proof to that point, is because every local community and state and region has their own way of kind of looking at things and what's important to them, and that's probably why there's not one silver bullet when it comes to how to measure the ecosystem. It's not like one metric. That being said, there are some metrics. I kind of think of this a little bit differently too. I like to think of metrics that no one's measuring yet that I think should be measured instead of the stuff that's being measured that doesn't matter, because those are available. But for example, one of the things I've always wanted to measure in our local community here in Salt Lake is the dollars of entrepreneurs, founders that have had a positive exit from their company. What percent or how much total dollars actually gets redeployed back into investing in other founding and startups and within the ecosystem, and seeing almost like that reuse of that capital gain that they had, and are they putting that back kind of into the local ecosystem? I think that would be an interesting metric to kind of really track, because I think that shows strength ultimately as founders get their exits. Are they redeploying that capital and putting it to use?
Oh, that's
Well
really
said,
smart.
Rob. Awesome.
So, we've kind of talked about kind of what's important, or at least begun that discussion. Where do you get your data? How do you maybe go to Rob first? How do you assemble all the data that you measure? Is it through survey of the ventures and the investors? What's the process?
So that's for Shane?
No, I'm sorry, for you, Rob.
Oh, so our data, most of the data that we collect, is pretty easy to collect and get, because it's around the stuff that we're doing in the community directly, around our accelerator and kind of the meetups and things that we have. So, things that I talked about earlier, the percent of the companies that are kind of getting funded, it's very centric, and I'm also a very active angel investor, and so I have insight to all the angel groups here in Utah, and so we hold, as part of one of the things we do, the first quarter of every year, is we bring all the angel groups together within the state, and we have all of those angel groups report on number of deals done, total dollars raised, another number of companies funded. We have a whole suite of metrics from kind of the angel layer that were pretty easy to obtain and track, because we do this annual angel summit. And then, of course, from an operational level, all the accelerator metrics that we run, we have direct access basically to that data. So one of the things we don't locally here, we do have a little harder time measuring, is the institutional metrics, because those guys don't really like to give up that data, so to speak, right? And so that being said, you can go to PitchBook and Mattermark, and there's other tools and platforms, CB Insights and things that you can get that data from to help supplement that.
Gotcha. Okay, so there are a few external sources, but by and large, it sounds like you get most of your data from within your own network.
Right. Correct.
Cool. And Shane, how about any guidance for those that are looking to collect data in their own ecosystems? Are there some, besides their own sort of counting heads and deals and so on, are there some go-to resources that might help?
Well, I mean, there are a handful of global or national databases that everybody knows about: Crunchbase, AngelList. There's fsuccess.com. Mattermark is new. Their data isn't public, but it's really good. We went through the incredibly difficult and ultimately, I would say, kind of failed effort of pulling as much data from those sources as we could, combining them, cleaning them up, which was a nightmare. The best data we have came from our curators, people like Robb.
Yeah.
We originally built the software thinking that it would just be 100% data contributed to by curators and by people themselves. But then we ultimately supplemented it with AngelList, Crunchbase, etc., because people demanded it. So we did that. But I have two tips for people listening who are thinking, okay, how do I collect data locally? Because we had some curators in some cities do an incredible job, and other cities failed. And the cities that failed to collect good data are the cities who just kind of threw stuff into a spreadsheet, emailed it to me, and then emailed a couple other influencers in town and said, hey, can you add to this? And the people that did really well set expectations and asked for a commitment at the beginning of the year, and they had quarterly meetups with influencers, people who are in charge of different initiatives and programs in town, and invited them to come to a meeting usually just a dinner at somebody's house, and bring data. They had dinner. It was a great opportunity for the leaders of that community to kind of network, and maybe you'd be surprised how infrequent that happens in a community. The leaders of the community meet and talk about how they can work together. So that's a great excuse to do that. But then after they eat dinner, they combine their data, they get it into good shape, they upload it into the system. So my tip would be assemble a little crew of people, little super connectors in your community, get them to commit to measuring things and collecting data and sharing it and putting it all together, and then everybody gets access to all of it. That's the benefit. And just get that buy-in at the beginning of the year.
And actually, a common thread between what both of you have said is it perpetuates by getting people together. The community-based data, it's really about not just what you're going to measure and getting the commitment, but actually getting people in the room together to share and talk about that information. Cool. I just want to remind folks that are viewing, please submit any questions you have, and you just from your screen click in the upper right hand corner. There's a square icon, and that will enable you it will activate a question box on the right hand side of your screen. So we certainly look forward to your questions, and we're continuing to dive into the questions you had previously submitted. So I'm going to read this one directly because it's a fairly long one, and I want to make sure I get all the information out. So I'll say the question, and then as I say it, we'll if one of you feels stronger about hopping in on it first, please do. But how do you measure the cultural transformation of a community, the coolness factor, or the feeling that there is a supportive business community that will help you succeed in your venture? So are there some, and this, I'm not sure if it's something, Rob, that you mentioned, have ever measured in your community, but Shane, are there some thoughts maybe on the cultural transformation of a community, how that might be measured?
I don't think it's a quantitative exercise. I think it's a qualitative exercise. And I think the way to do it is to interview the community veterans that have been there a long time and get their sense for how it's changed, and people who moved into town, and interview them. Sit down and do like a full-blown customer development interview, dive deep, ask why. And then interview local entrepreneurs and ask them how hard it is to get help for any kind of whatever they run into when they try to reach out and get help. Do they get the help they need? Do they end up looking outside of the community?
And is that something you would do, let's say, annually, and sort of the first year as a baseline, and then from there be able to look at trends?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I think it's I don't know. It's something that I've lived in 4 different cities for like good chunks of time, and in each instance I got involved locally and tried to provide my little slice of value for the community. And one of the first things I'd do when I moved there is I'd interview the veterans, the people that have lived there for 10 years. And I've asked them, how's this community changed? Where did it come from? What are you happy about? What are you not happy about? They're the only people that have a sense for that transformation of the culture. I don't know if there's any way to do it quantitatively.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Rob, thoughts on this? Is cultural transformation something that's important to your work at all?
Yeah, I think so, and I agree. It's really hard to kind of measure this, but I will tell you, some of the conversations that are happening here that people are talking about. For example, like 3 or 4 years ago in Salt Lake City, right in the downtown smack central business district, there was no place really for entrepreneurs to go and to hang out and to get critical mass. And like now we have more than 5 pretty large co-location areas where people are talking about things, having conversations, building companies. And so like I've learned through that experience that as I've watched our community get more mature in the whole ecosystem, that the number of like clusters and areas and co-locations where people are really eating, drinking, sleeping, kind of the whole entrepreneurial stuff is is a way to kind of look at that cultural basis of what it is. And so I was just in San Diego like 3 weeks ago, and when I was there, I was walking around downtown. I was just asking people, where's the ecosystem? Where's the entrepreneurial ecosystem here? Where are the founders at? Where are they hanging out? Where can I go have coffee with them? I was just in town, had about 4 hours. I wanted to go mentor them and provide some of my angel investing kind of tips and tricks and all that kind of good stuff. And I had a really hard time in San Diego to actually find these little clusters where people were hanging out. So for me, that's one way of indicating kind of what that strength could be.
I think what Robb is describing is what Jeff Wood of Des Moines, Iowa calls a center of gravity, a community center of gravity. And he's got a great blog post out there. It's Jeff Geoff Wood. He's got a great post out there where he describes the importance of a center of gravity in a community, and he created the one in Des Moines when there wasn't one, and how it's impacted the community and benefited the local entrepreneurs.
It may be like some communities now have innovation districts or whatnot, where there's an obvious geographic center. Is that part of what you might measure?
I don't know about innovation centers. Those or districts. Those tend to be not my group of people. I'm thinking more like like the co-working spaces or the coffee shop where the real founders go, or where the real startup people go. You know what I mean? Like the people wearing hoodies, not ties.
Gotcha.
Nothing that's university funded or government funded or stuff that's just organically grown and started usually by an entrepreneur who's been there for a long time. Yeah.
Okay. Good. That's great. So the next question we have is about benchmarking data, and it's very simply, how do we best benchmark data?
I have a strong opinion on that.
Please.
I hate comparing cities against each other. I hate ranking cities. I think it's a waste of time, and it's, I don't know, misleading. I think that you should only benchmark yourself against your former self.
Maybe this is a Caddyshack moment when Chevy Chase was asked how does he compare himself to other golfers, and he says by height.
I don't think any city should be striving to be like another city at all, ever. And too many cities do that. They want to be the next Silicon Valley, etc. I think they should just focus on being a better version of themselves next year, 5 years out and 10 years out, and they should figure out what's unique about about their city, and then tell that story and attract those type of entrepreneurs and embrace their local differences and industries. And so benchmark yourself against yourself. Don't benchmark yourself against other geographies. That's my take. Sure.
Well, I suppose it sells newspapers or magazines to benchmark.
Yeah, it's great press. It's great press.
There you go. And how about, what are your thoughts, Robb? I would imagine you do some local benchmarking in terms of your year-over-year change.
Yeah, everything we do here is pretty local. So I would totally agree with what Shane just said. I mean, I think that's one of the benefits we have in kind of our local ecosystem here is that it's all about one of the challenges we do have in here is we have this for those of you not familiar with Utah, we have like 85% of our population living right in front of this great mountain range called the Wasatch Front. And so what we actually get into is if there's any benchmarking being done, it's how Salt Lake City is doing against Provo and how Provo is doing against Ogden, and we have that we have rivalry up and down this Wasatch Front, this 150-mile range of beautiful mountains, and I think some of that actually is healthy, quite honestly, because you're still kind of benchmarking across your state and benchmarking not only within yourself as a local community, but I think it is to have one arm's length reach to your other local communities around, because if you do that, having that rivalry actually increases the whole state strength in the ecosystem. And so as long as we're moving the state up, I think we'd all agree, that's good to do.
Robb, do you find that there is a healthy level of collaboration between those communities along that beautiful mountain range?
Historically, no. Historically, it's actually been more, I would say, competitive than collaborative. Yes, and I think only in the last, I'm going to say 18 months, and I'm going to say what's happened at least here in Utah is as each community has grown and really strengthened, it's now only at the time that we can come across and connect and collaborate and share best practices and work really better. It's like each one of us, we're trying to find our own identity and move up, and now that we've moved up, I'm now seeing that collaboration certainly coming across the individual communities.
This is something that's driven me crazy. I get so frustrated when I see two communities that, you know, when you're outside of the entire state and you're looking at like St. Paul and Minneapolis, or like Lincoln, Nebraska, and Omaha, Nebraska, and they fight, you know,
Yes.
and they talk bad about each other, and they don't ever collaborate or even talk. It drives me crazy. And then, but sometimes I think, well, maybe the competition's good, like you said, and I should just stop worrying about this so much.
Well, it also might be actually from the Utah philosopher Stephen Covey, who said we have to be independent before we become interdependent. So maybe there's a certain threshold that that certain geographies need to get to in terms of their maturity before they can actually collaborate and whatnot. I don't know. It's a hypothesis. But I had to bring in Stephen Covey somehow.
Nice. Way to pull that out as a memory bank.
So,
yeah, that was nice.
So we've got about 20 minutes left, maybe 10 minutes or so of this kind of Q&A, and then we'll kind of go to some final thoughts. But I want to make sure, we haven't seen any questions submitted yet, so I want to make sure if people have questions that they feel free to submit them. And again, click on that icon in the upper right-hand corner, and that will activate your ability to ask questions. So, Shane, this one's probably 100% to you, and Rob, feel free to hop in if you have thoughts. But Shane, what happened to Startup Genome and Kauffman's interest in measuring ecosystems? So maybe you can give us a little bit of kind of where it is and where it might go.
Yeah, this is one of the questions you sent me in advance, and I've been thinking about it. Startup Genome, you know, it's still live, it's still running, it's kind of on maintenance mode right now. We had funding from Kauffman. We had a number of small grants come through from Kauffman, and we were hoping for a big grant. And one of the mistakes I think I made was assuming that would eventually come and not doing any other fundraising. So we had a small little budget. We kind of kept it going. We kept growing and improving it. We had some nice growth. We grew from 0 to 3,000 curators, over 100 countries all around the world. Then Kauffman stopped giving us money, and it's our fault. I think we didn't crack the nut. I don't think we could prove definitively that the value that we created was big enough for Kauffman to give us the big grant. And so I started consulting, and that's what Bill said in the beginning when he mentioned I'm involved with 2 companies. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm consulting, but I'm keeping it alive because there's a nice community of curators that are still using it, getting a lot of value out of it. I'm looking. Kauffman actually called us up the other day, and so we're writing another grant, and also looking at where this might live. It might maybe to live inside of a different organization might be a better home for it. Now, our bigger vision, I think another mistake that we made, our bigger vision was to create tools for community builders to help them do more of what they do better. And we thought maps were the right place to start. Around that time, there were a lot of maps happening. A lot of people were mapping their community. TechCrunch was publishing maps. Like there was an article, the TechCrunch post. It was like Los Angeles startup map. This has never been done before. So we thought it was sexy, so we started with maps. We probably shouldn't have started with maps because maps actually don't help drive decisions. They're very beautiful, and we built them so that you could filter them and embed them on other websites, and that happened a lot. But they don't drive decisions. And when we started figuring out what did drive decisions, that's when we ran out of money. We didn't have time to build those interactive charts and graphs, and we got a little bit of it. If you go to the site now, if you go to any city or state or country's page, you'll see a map, and below that you'll see a number of charts and graphs. We started to get into that. The other question you asked, what happened to Kauffman's interest in measuring ecosystems? It's true they're doing fewer grants in this space, which I think is a result of kind of a strategic realignment and some internal restructuring that happened, but they're still doing research. They're not giving as much grants to people like nonprofits doing stuff in the startup community world, but they're still publishing white papers, and they're trying. If you look at them, they're trying to answer all the same questions that you just asked me and Rob. What should be measured? What's important? What doesn't matter? They have a great paper I think you should read where they debunked the myth of brain drain. You know, so many communities are terrified of brain drain. And everybody graduates and goes to a different city,
right,
or they move to the big city. You know, like Lincoln, Nebraska thinks that happens. Thinks because there's a big university, they think students graduate and then they go to Omaha. And they totally debunked it across many municipalities. Typically, those people end up coming back within a few years. Anyway,
gotcha.
So read that.
Yeah, if you have a link, I'll certainly share it with the group. So we have our first submitted question. This is a real-time question, and it's from James Hedren in Arkansas. And so he acknowledges Shane doesn't believe in measuring one's ecosystem against others, but what would you suggest, if you were going to do it, what would you suggest as important metrics to measure? So let's, Rob, you know, when you compare Salt Lake City to Ogden and some of the other communities, what do you look at? What are the things that you look at as key indicators?
Yeah, I think the community here, unfortunately, starts with looking at the funding metrics, like what companies are getting funded and what community they're coming from. That still seems to be like one that everyone quickly identifies with. It's pretty easy to measure, I think, is also, quite honestly, the other reason why, and I'm not suggesting that that is a good metric, but it seems to one to be easy to measure, to use as a comparison.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. I think
are there, you know, if you look out, you know, 12 or 24 months or whatnot, do you think that will still be what you're measuring to compare communities, or do you see an evolution to some other key indicators?
I'm not seeing the evolution locally here yet, just because I think when we've had these meetups and conversations around this subject matter, everyone sits around, everyone has a different like metric. It's really been hard to get community kind of agreement of what we should measure, and so it ends up being more of a debate, and people end up saying we should measure this or we should measure that, and it's so I don't think so. I don't think we're going to see an evolution, but honestly, not in that short of a term. Maybe 5 years out or 8 years out.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Great. And Shane, I saw you chiming in. So, what are your thoughts on this?
If I were to compare two cities, I'd want to know the differences. I wouldn't do the exercise so that in a year I could see if the cities are closer together, right? So what I would want to do is understand why they're different so that I could then leverage those differences, tell those stories about why one city is unique. So what I would look at is I would break out startups based on the stage they're in and see how that compares between two cities. Do we have more companies making it to Series A or to, you know, I'm using funding terms, forget about that, making it to 10 employees, making it to 100 employees, or making it to $1 million in revenue, or making it to whatever it is. Find something that shows how the companies grow or what stage they're in, and I've seen many different organizations try to build like state categories of startups, you know, it's like idea, startup, scale, growth, all that stuff. I'd want to see that break out and compare to two cities, and then see if one city is really good at fostering growth stage companies and one city is really good at fostering startup stage companies. I'd also want to look at where the funding's coming from. So, you know, we're here in Arizona. I'm here in Arizona. I heard a rumor that we have the most active angel investment group in the country. I haven't validated that. They say they deploy a significant amount of capital locally, which surprises me because I don't see a whole lot of startups coming out of the state or big sexy stories of startups coming out of the state. So I want to look at the numbers on that. I want to understand for a city how much of the money invested in startups is coming locally or it's coming externally. And I would do that. I would compare that against two cities. And you could learn, is one city really good at recruiting investment capital from an outside? Why? what is it? Why are investors in other parts of the country looking at that city, and how do we get that to happen in our city?
Gotcha. So
yeah, that's all I got.
I have a I'll aim at a sort of a quick answer question for both of you. And so, giving a little context, so that you understand that the folks that are going to be, whether they're watching it now or will be watching this webinar, are community leaders and really spread throughout the country, and that they have a lot of collegial interest in not just propelling their own community, but potentially helping their peer group do well as well. And in fact, there's our next summit will be in February in California. And so I guess one of the things that we've talked about a little bit internally is the idea that there are variety. Each community right now, if they're measuring their ecosystem success in any way, is sort of doing it on their own and doing it with their own measures. I guess and maybe Robb's experience at what he's been trying to do locally and not having commonality in terms of what gets measured is partly an indicator to this. But do you I guess, would it be valuable, do you think, for sort of us collectively, this startup champions network, to attempt to create commonality, at least with one or two metrics in terms of what we measure, so that we have some baselines and can do some comparisons, or not? And again, we don't have probably time to go into detail and depth with this, but sort of a quick answer, and it'll be a topic for another day, I think. Robb, what do you think?
Yeah, so I'm going to say yes to that. I'm going to say yes, even though I commented earlier about our local community, how they spend a lot of time arguing. I think the context that has to be sent going in to like one of these summits would be like, let's just try not argue which is better, which is worse. Let's just pick 2 or 3 things, so we've got something we measure. Otherwise, we're going to leave here and not going to be able to measure anything, and that's probably worse. Back to some of what Shane, other comments have been made is around comparing things, right, and trying to have the validated learning and see what's changed and what's difference between them. And so yeah, I'm going to say yeah. I think I would certainly like to participate in something like that.
Cool, thank you. Shane, your thoughts? And again, kind of quick, actually, we have another audience-submitted question I want to get to really quick as well.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, you guys should get together and try to come up with a metric that you all agree on. We need to do research at the national level. Yeah. We need to research at the regional level. We can only do that if we have data that's apples and apples. And if nothing else, trying to do this, even if you fail, we'll start some conversations and build some new relationships that should happen. So. Yeah, it's a great use for this network, the Startup Champions network that you have. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So another quick question, and we are kind of, the sand is running out of the hourglass. So a quick question from Amanda Styron West from Iowa.
Hi, Amanda.
So do you know of any communities or groups who are measuring their ecosystems based on Kaufman's Measuring an Entrepreneurial Ecosystem report? So Shane, you're nodding. I see the nodding, and I know Robb's read it. So Shane, what do you think?
No, I don't know anybody.
Okay.
I don't. It's the stuff they have in there is theoretically great, but like connectivity is one. Some are easier. Like I think they have like 5 things. I shouldn't recall them because like connectivity, diversity, something else. Some of them are really easy to measure. Some of them are impossible. My biggest problem is that some of them, the source for that data is the census or other places like that, and the universe of that data is not very helpful because I'm usually interested in high growth startups only, early stage startups only, and it's impossible to separate that out from their massive list of database of companies. They're looking at any small business. So I don't know anybody who has applied Kaufman's recommendations in any sort of valuable way. No. Is Amanda doing it?
Yeah, that's a good question. Unfortunately, we can't. Well, she could put in a question that would tell us, but I don't know. So, Rob, you were smiling, and actually, that was the first thing you sent me when we started talking about this. So, I know you at least think part of the report is really important. So, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the one that I do see communities measuring, and I've seen us measure this internally within the state of Utah, and I know Colorado and a couple of the other places I go to, is this this entrepreneur density metric, which is how many entrepreneurs per 1,000 capital or whatever it is. And right or wrong, it seems like of all of the metrics I've read in the Coffin report, and that's the only one I do hear people quoting and using when I go to other communities. So that would be one. I think if you're going to measure one, it seems like that's the hot one of the 5.
Gotcha. Cool.
I love density. My problem with that is like, okay, this company is a lot more dense than, or sorry, this city is a lot more dense than this city.
Yep.
How do we find out why, and how do we change that?
Good, all valid. So as I said, unfortunately, we can get into the surface of some of these things, but that could be probably a whole nother call. So,
density, yeah.
So to bring things to sort of a finer point, so that we get sort of some summary thoughts. Are there some sort of major takeaways? And let's take it from the sort of local community perspective first. And Rob, in terms of if you look out, particularly on what you're going to focus on, looking again that sort of 12 or 24 months out, where do you see your sort of measuring of success evolving to? What do you want to see happen in the next 12 or 24 months that would be impactful?
Yeah, I don't know if I have a direct answer for that. I think one thing I would personally like to see is we have a cluster of about maybe 18 or 20 people that are really the thought leaders and true community leaders that are out there giving and doing. I'd like to see that number grow to be 40, 50, 60, or 100. Because I think if we have more of these community leaders that are really kind of out there, the byproduct should hopefully be positive, right, all the way through. And so the number of community leadership, right, in the given city would be probably a metric I would look at to see if we can grow.
Oh, that's great. No, that's super. So, Shane, you've shared a lot of things that are very global in focus, and I think really helpful to folks. Are there some takeaways or encouragements that you would give folks trying to do this on a local level from what you've seen in terms of best practices?
Yeah, I've got a couple pieces of advice based on experience and observation. One would be stop trying to do it yourself. Every time you get in front of the community at an event or program, at the end of that, always ask if there's anybody in the audience that would like to get involved, help, volunteer, please come talk to me. I've found many volunteers that way. We need more people. Like Rob just said, we need more community builders because sometimes it's thankless and it's a lot of work and it's usually on a volunteer basis, so we just need more volunteers. And the other piece of advice I'd have is be more open. I see so much ego brought into this, or maybe it's not ego. It's like that you plant your flag and you want credit. You want to put your name on every report or initiative locally, and I hate that. And I want to see more organizations working together and just forgetting to put their names on like the report or the name of the event. Just put them as like a little contributing sponsor, even if they did a lot of work behind it. I want to share the credit, or I want to see the credit shared, and I think that would really help the problem of having a lot of fragmented data.
Yeah, I think it was Truman that said it's amazing what can happen when no one cares who gets credit. So yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. So we did have another question come in from James Hedren. James, we'll see if we can respond to that offline, and just because we do promise a certain amount of time for folks. So we've got just a minute or so left, and I want to thank everybody for participating. For those viewing, understand this is being recorded, so if you came in late or want to share it with people, we'll make it available within a day or so for you to do that. I really want to thank both Rob and Shane for giving not just their time, but their experience and wisdom to us. It's fantastic, and we welcome you to sort of be a part of what we're doing from here forward. You're now deputized, so feel free to be a part of this, and certainly we really appreciate that. And also, if we could have everybody clap, I would do that, but I don't have a mechanism for that. Clap at home. But our next webinar, as I mentioned, will be on Thursday, January 14th, and the topic will be inclusive entrepreneurship and how do we, whether your issue is rural inclusivity or minority or geographic or age or whatever your inclusive challenge is, we're going to gather a panel together to talk about that issue. So if we've already got a queue of people who we're looking at to be a part of it, we're certainly open to others. So if there are folks you think that would be really important to that discussion, just send them off to me, and I will certainly get them connected in. So let's see. Brian Ardinger says, "Thanks, guys. Catch up soon." So,
hi, Brian.
Hey, Brian.
Thank you, Brian, for clapping from home. So, thank you, Shane. Thank you, Rob. I think we've done our duty, and I really appreciate you guys taking the time.
Okay. Thanks for having us, man. Thanks for
All right,
organizing
have a good
us.
one. Talk soon.
Bye.
Bye now.